Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
Yo, welcome to day 19 of the devoted reading series of the VIBEZ Daily podcast. I am excited to be back with my friends Collin, Shameeka, my wife Victoria, to be here. We are on our final day of reading the book of Genesis. We are going to complete one book of the Bible together, and we can mark that off and say we've done that. So I'm excited to conclude that today. But every word is important. Every chapter is important. We're not going to rush through this and try to get to the end necessarily. So we'll talk about 48, 49, and 50 today. We last left off with Israel and his sons and Joseph's family settling in Goshen here and really just kind of getting settled. And now Jacob goes to kind of extend some blessings in these next couple chapters through first some intentional ones to Joseph's sons, but then ultimately some blessings throughout the rest of his family. But yeah, what jumps out to you guys in chapter 48? So he starts with Joseph's sons specifically, which is, interesting. Obviously, Joseph is one of the younger sons himself, but deals with Ephraim and Manasseh. Anything that jumped out to you guys in the way that he blessed them?
I just got to start with this. So it's interesting how you said like Jacob goes to bless the sons, because I'm thinking like at the beginning of Jacob's story, the issue was identity. He wanted to be like Esau. And it's like we keep bouncing back between Jacob and Israel, even to his death. So it's like his entire life, he still has been struggling with identity.
Yeah. Like it makes zero sense. And why it just continues, because it doesn't happen for anybody else. Like Abram goes to Abraham and he's just Abraham. Even like you just think New Testament, I mean, you never call Paul Saul again, right? Like they never go back. And so very interesting. Excuse me, on his part. Anything else that jumps out to you guys there?
I think it's interesting that in verse 4, as he's recounting what God has told him and how God told him, "Behold, I'll make you fruitful and multiply you." I mean, it's interesting that yesterday we looked at chapter 47. And at the end of chapter 47, in verse 27, it was saying that they gained possessions in the land of Goshen and they were fruitful and multiplied greatly.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like even just reiterating, like, I like that he looked back on what the Lord promised him. And then chapter 47 was looking forward into like that God had actually did this and fulfilled his promise. And we see this later on when we actually get to Exodus, right?
Yeah. 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 Anything else? I mean, it's very interesting that he kind of adopts Ephraim and Manasseh as his own,
Right.
Which ultimately, we'll come to see that when tribes are established and things of that nature, that there will become known as the two half tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. But anything else with this blessing specifically?
I was gonna say, but like before I get to the blessing, I did notice that in verse 11 how Israel was just so excited to see his like grandsons that were born through Joseph. Like it made it seem like this was the first time that he saw them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but wait, like he's been there for a while now. Like I don't know what took them so long for him to meet his grandsons. But just seeing that this was a moment for him where he's like, man, like the Lord has blessed me not just see my son, but my grandsons. I was just wondering what was going on in between time to where he hadn't already met them.
Yeah.
It wasn't until like his dying bed, like he was literally about to die, that he met them.
That's good.
Because it's so funny. It's like, they're mine. I claim them as my own sons. Wait, who are these people?
Right.
He's like, who are they? I was like, these are the sons you just claimed.
Yeah.
Good. Good. Okay. He gives Ephraim a greater blessing than Manasseh.
Yeah.
And Joseph's not really having it. He's trying to like, no, I think you're off, Dad.
Right.
Yeah. Anything that was interesting here.
Yeah. Like Joseph is continuing, or not Joseph, Jacob / Israel is like continuing what his mom taught him, like to steal a blessing from your older brother and to have that be passed on to you, and to see that he was intentional about doing that. Despite like Joseph like trying to correct him, like he knew exactly what he was doing, despite his eyes, kind of failing him a little bit. So again, just seeing that history in their family of like these different things that continues to happen, that they don't stop when it comes to them, like they continue on.
Yeah, and how this whole book has really been about manipulation, and this is really the first time the manipulation stops. He says, like, Joseph, I see what you're trying to do, but I'm going to obey what the Lord says.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is interesting that there is this pattern of, like, again, whom you think deserves this is not who God has ordained. And, like, again, just getting ourselves in a posture of like, well, let's just submit to your will rather than what I think it should be.
Yeah.
And just kind of seeing that happen again and again, and seeing that here with Ephraim and Manasseh.
Yeah. I think it's interesting in verse 22. I never noticed this before, but he was saying that he gave this mountain slope with this land that he took by the hand from the Amorites with his sword and with his bow. And I don't remember you going. But I was trying to look this up just to see, and I read some commentary on it that some believe this was actually Shechem, that where his sons went and took over and killed all the men because of Dinah.
Yeah.
But this is the land that he is speaking of, and that he's using some type of wordplay here, and maybe Moses, as a writer, further down the road, recognizes these men as Amorites and more of a totality of who they were. And so I thought that was interesting because I remember, Abraham getting down with the sword and stuff, but I don't remember him. So it just kind of resonated like he's speaking of something that wasn't made so clear earlier.
Good. Anything else? Okay. So he extends, so that's kind of an initial blessing with Ephraim and Manasseh, and then in 49 he calls the rest of his sons and goes through like each one of them and kind of prophesies and blesses and kind of tells them what will come. Anything that just jumped out to you guys about what his last words? This is his last shot to say something, and this is what he shares. Anything that was significant to you guys in chapter 49?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting just seeing him lay out each son, and specifically like for some of them it wasn't no blessings; it would seem like curses more so. But he did not forget, like starting off with Reuben, like you hear it sets up real good and nice. He was like, "You're the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor," and then he talks about like, "But you defiled me." Like, and you spoke about this a few days ago, just like, yeah, Reuben slept with his father's concubine, and like, his dad ain't forget about that. Like, and so now we're seeing, even going to Simeon and Levi, like, how, again, in my eyes, I thought it was a little justified in taking up for their sister Dinah, but still, like, like their father is like, no, these were things that I was not pleased with at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at the Levi, because I was when he said Levi, I was like, well, I don't feel like the Levites were really that bad of a people, because they were working in the temple later, and I'm like, well, how long does this like blessing or not a blessing last for? But then I did think about later on, there's a group called the Korathites that go against Moses, and they end up being some of it swallowed up by the ground. And I was just like, oh yeah, they were quarrelsome, like, and they were described as like evil men, and they were described as like rebellious men. And I was like, this is probably part of that seed that Jacob's referring to here. That is like, yeah, this evilness, this fierceness, this anger that you guys have, this wrath, it actually does show up there. And I was just like, oh, maybe you're right. It just took me a while to think about this, because I was like, not the Levites.
Yeah.
I like verse 17. He's talking about Dan and how Dan would be a snake by the roadside and a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backwards. And it's like all these bad things. And in verse 18, it says that I look for your deliverance, Lord. And it's like, even in the midst of all these bad things that I see you doing, Dan, I'm still going to be praying for your deliverance.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think in general, it goes back to, one of the things you pointed out, Collin, a couple of days ago, and that, like, I appreciate that he's not mincing words in some of this, right? That, like, he is very much being direct and clear that even if it's not something you want to hear, like, this is what's going to happen. Like, we're just going to call it out, and we're going to tell the truth. And I think it goes back to just, this idea that prophecy is not always pretty. Like, it's not always, again, something that's going to be exciting to hear, right? And sometimes we're going to hear from the Lord, and it's not going to be something we want to know. But to your point, whether it's Reuben or Simeon and Levi, or even if you said with Dan, there's just kind of a, again, I won't stop praying for you, but like there's this intentionality of like, I'm going to tell you the truth and what's going to happen, whether you really want to hear it or not. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. And pointing out Judah, like I know we've been talking about him, and it took me a while to actually, have my heart softened to Judah, but just seeing like these verses speak just well of him, like Judah, your brothers will be praised, and then even the foreshadowing, like we see the lion associated with Judah, and seeing that representation of even Jesus in this text was really cool to see.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like I said, there's definitely so much messianic prophecy in just these lines about Judah specifically. It's so, again, we have hindsight, right? So we can read it and see it and understand that. But yeah, the scepter, not departing from him, right? Like there's this essentially that a ruler and a king will always be in the line of Judah, which we see take place. Like there's all these different things that, it's so much. Again, whether Jacob knows this or not, like it's so much about the Messiah.
Yeah. Which confirms too that like Jacob was speaking with the Lord, like may have shared with him, and like this wasn't just like fluff or just stuff that he was coming up with. Like no, like he was very intentional about these blessings for each of his children. So yeah.
Good. Any of the other prophecy that jumped out to you that you thought were interesting?
Yeah, I really like how Joseph's blessing, it's also very lengthy like Judah's was. But like his acknowledgement of being attacked and harassed, and he just acknowledges what he's been through.
Yeah.
But, but the mighty one of Jacob, right? The God of your father who has helped you. Like, this acknowledgement on Israel's part that, like, our God was here for you and with you. So, I love that. And then later on, after the blessings, may just refer. I think it's really interesting in verse 31 that Leah made it to sleep next to Israel, and she was laid in the tomb with the ancestors, but Rachel didn't. Like Rachel was left in the land of Bethlehem, eventually considered Bethlehem, but she died along the way, and he buried her somewhere on the side of the road. But later, she ended up next to him because eventually they take his bones right to over there, and so I think it's really interesting that she's the one who ended up being laid next to him.
Yeah, I thought so too, because I'm like, out of all, you would have thought that, Rachel would have been there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's kind of leads us into Jacob's burial, which happens here in the 49, beginning of 50. Anything else outside of just the fact that Leah got the instructions to lay him next to Leah? Anything else in 50 or about his burial, particularly that you guys thought was interesting?
I just love how Jacob, like we said yesterday, is so adamant about taking him back to the promised land.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think in this moment, like, Jacob is in a new territory and he's sitting up in Egypt and he's like, through my death, I want you all to understand and remember the promise. Like, this is a temporary place, but y'all don't need to build a house here. I called y'all to a greater land and a greater place that my fathers have established for us. And don't get too comfortable in your Egypt that you miss your promise.
Yeah, and I love that. To that point, I love how even in the last few verses of chapter 50, when Joseph tells them, like, God will surely visit you. You should carry up my bones from here. And so, like, even Joseph, who's well established there, who was ruling there, was like, okay, God's gonna come and get y'all and take us out of here. And when that happens, make sure you take my bones too. Like,
which is again foreshadowing also to like what's to come. Like, they're about to experience like a lot of like hardship, but for him to even say that before he dies and beforehand, like, God is going to come to your aid. Like, he is the one that is going to provide. He's the one that's going to save. That's really good to see that beforehand.
Good. Yeah, I'll just say I also thought it was just really interesting and in some ways it was just challenging. Just the way that people just mourned with one another. That like it wasn't their father, but it was just like these people would just mourn and cry out on behalf of others who are mourning.
Yeah. Especially the Egyptians.
Yeah, right. Like, so it's not even your people. But it's like, but Joseph is our guy, and if Joseph is mourning, like, we're mourning.
Yeah.
And I just love it that like their heart broke with him, and as his heart broke. And I think it's a challenge and it's encouraging for us to weep with one another and rejoice with one another, but also to mourn with one another in those moments as well.
Yeah. And to like, I thought it was interesting them pointing out the embalming happening, because before, like, when people were dying, they were just going to get buried. So I didn't know if this was like an Egyptian practice where they embalm people, or if this was just something that was commonly done, but no one ever talked about it until this text. I thought that was interesting. But again, like, the mourning process did stick out to me, because 70 days for the Egyptians to mourn, and then there was another period where Joseph also mourned again for his father. Like, that definitely stuck out. And two, can we talk about the fact that like he had to reassure his brothers again? Like,
that's one of my favorite.
Yeah, they was like, all right now, like, my daddy done died. Like, daddy could have been the one that was keeping us, still safe and alive. Like, are we good? Like,
I think it was eye-opening that like they just were not sure that Joseph really forgave them. And I think that it happens so often, right? That like sometimes the hardest person for us to forgive is ourselves.
Ooh.
Like, it's not even that, like, you know, people have extended of grace, they've given us forgiveness, they've moved on from it, but like we're having the hardest time letting it go, and we're still living as if there's something being held over us. And that's kind of how his brothers were. They were just like, look, I don't care what you said. We know what we've done.
Yeah.
And if we were you, we would do something about it, right? And not being able to recognize that Joseph is not them, and he's had his own approach to it himself.
Yeah, because like at this point, like Joseph, I feel like has shown like love towards them and favor. Like, man, we done brought the whole family over. Like, he's done what he's promised that he would to provide like them like, you know, food, and like they're reaping like the fruitfulness of like what Joseph has been able to accomplish through God. And so again, like you would think that would be enough to show them like, okay, like we're good, but no, they still, and it could just be that guilt and that shame that they were carrying on themselves, that like Joseph been set the tone for them of like, don't think about the past, like don't worry about it, like all is well, we're good. But yeah, these events take place now to where they're just like, I don't know.
Yeah. And I love how in verse 21 is like, he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Like, he could have been saying all this and been still a little bit harsh or a little bit rude or a little bit. I do love that they know that, like, you know, he was speaking kindly to them. Like love is patient and love is kind. Like, he was doing these things.
Yeah, because I think forgiveness is, and even just love in general is, it's also about like what you're willing to do for that person, and not just like what you're willing to avoid, right? Because I think like, you know, we can often approach forgiveness as, I have forgiven you, but I'm also just not going to deal with you, right? Like, I'm just going to avoid you. And Joseph had every right and every ability, man. He is second to Pharaoh. He probably lives in a whole different part of Egypt than even like his brothers and them do. Like, he could just stay in the palace and like not deal with his brothers. But he went above and beyond. Like, he took it the extra step and said, not only do I forgive you, and if I let it go, I'm going to now show kindness. I'm actually going to extend myself to you and give something to you. And I think that is next level in our journey of forgiveness, is to now be able to turn around and offer actual love and something to those individuals.
Yeah. And then to make this personal, like, I feel like there are times in my life where there would be something that would trigger a certain thought or emotion of like kind of going back to a moment or a season where, like, you know, it's past. And I wondered for them if their trigger was seeing Joseph weep over their father, because they did see their father weep over Joseph, like being dead, so to speak. So I wonder if that, seeing that mourning and that like grief was the thing that kind of brought them back to like, okay, we've seen this before. Like, and caused them to kind of go into that state of fear of like, oh yeah, he's gonna hold a grudge against us.
I'm still stuck on verse 20. Because we always quote this verse. And we say that what the enemy intended for evil, God intended for good. But we have to notice that it says right here, what you intended to harm me with. But God intended it for my good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. And what's interesting is that from the start of Joseph's story in chapter 39, all the way to chapter 50, the one person who is not mentioned in any of Joseph's story is Satan. And this is a very regular story. And you see how God works in an everyday life. And a lot of times we put stuff on Satan that's really just people being flawed. And so we have to be honest about people's character and people's judgment.
Lord have mercy.
And stop attributing this behavior to Satan.
Come on.
And start looking at your neighbor and say, no, that was you.
Come on, accountability.
Let the church say amen.
I think we're getting on that note. Look.
That's so real. It's so good. And I think just overall from Genesis, we had a few different themes, right? We started from the beginning, and now we're kind of here with Joseph. And, we've talked through a bunch of different themes: justice and mercy and creation and identity and obviously the enemy and God and his character. But I think what I love about how you ended that for us is, I think from all of it, there ought to be a takeaway for us to really just see that the purpose of Scripture, the purpose of these stories, the purpose of what we learned about God through all of this was to help us figure out how to live our everyday life, right? And to see what we can apply and understand and to do that. And so I think Genesis does give us a lot of examples, a lot of narrative, a lot of stories that we can learn from, some what not to do, excuse me, some what to do. But I think it was a great journey through Genesis. But we have officially completed one book out of 66, so we still have 65 to go. But we are well on our way, and so we can check that off and mark that off as being completed. When we start reading on Monday, we will be in Exodus chapter 1. And take us about 2 weeks, I think, to get through Exodus as a whole. But man, thank you guys so much this week, and really the last couple of weeks as we've gone through Genesis. When we come back in Exodus, may or may not be the same friends that will discuss Exodus, but definitely look forward to seeing you then as we continue this journey through the Bible and continue to be committed and devoted in that regard. But you all take care. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.